All the practitioners, I believe, agree with me that the most and the biggest challenge whenever we develop a country branding or a place branding project is not about the great idea, not about who we are, not about what we want to be, but it's about measurement and about management. So how to engage not only the stakeholders within government organizations, but also from private institutions, and make sure that everybody agrees and understands and say, this is the way to go, and moreover, this is who we are. So it is, of course, very interesting to see projects like the Great Britain Campaign or Brand Africa, which definitely are completely different. One is a continent, the other one is a country. And it is extremely interesting to see what they're going to say on what was their strategy, how they're dealing with managing the brand, and how they're measuring the brand, and why measurement is so important. So the first speaker is Conrad Bird. He's the director of the Great Britain Campaign. Mr. Conrad Bird works in the Prime Minister's office, and the floor is yours.
Can we play a video, please? Is that possible? Great. Well, I just want to thank everybody for coming today, and I feel very honoured to be amongst so many practitioners. I've read through your biographies, and I really feel we are really quite, we don't often meet, do we, as a fellow practitioners? We're not often readily understood. These are quite challenging things we do. It involves art, it involves science, it involves huge communities. It's not corporate branding. It's not the private sector. It's a different kind of game. And that is really, I guess, the story I'd like to tell you through the Great Britain campaign. I just apologise for some of the video. I use it to remind me where we've been for the last 3 years. But actually also, some of that data is clearly out of date now. I mean, in terms of the return on investment, which I'll go on in a moment, it's all about measurement. It's about this combination, which I'd like to emphasize, of art, strength, campaigning, imagery, with a really, really well-focused strategy and fantastic measurements. And how we measure is really central to actually continuing to win the license to operate from the Treasury, from other private sector partners and so on. It is about the measurement as much as the imagery. But I just want to kind of kick off and tell you the story, then perhaps we could pick up on much of the measurement later. As the story says, it kicked off in 2011, just before the Olympics, to take advantage of two opportunities: the 2012 Olympics, Paralympics, and the Diamond Jubilee, and one massive threat, which was the financial economic crisis, which actually, in the jargon of the day, gave us a burning platform. We had a marvellous opportunity to actually demonstrate Britain's strengths and story to the rest of the world, 4 billion people watching, but we also actually had an economic imperative to deliver more tourists, encourage more tourists to come to the UK, more international students, help our businesses export off the back of the Olympics and other areas and actually pull in more inward investment. And these two imperatives, one, if you like, a soft power, publicity, promotional imperative, and other, a very, very hard financial imperative, caused us to look very, very closely at what the British government was planning for 2012. And I'm sure, like in many ways, when you look at that, we found it very encouraging, but we weren't sure, actually, the whole was going to be greater than the sum of the parts. We weren't sure of that. And therefore, this simple, bold idea to put everything, our tourism activity, our trade and inward investment activity, our educational activity, pull it all under one brand, one banner. Dangerous, because it meant that certain areas had to give up a little to gain more. Put it under one banner to try and drive through together and actually deliver an effective campaign, at the heart of which is jobs and growth for Britain. And that's really important. When we kicked this off, people were saying to us, well, what's this about? And I didn't use words like nation branding or whatever. I didn't talk about reputation. I didn't actually talk about making people feel better about us. It was a really hard economic metric. We want this campaign to deliver more jobs and growth for Britain. And that's continually what we return to in terms of the return on investment of the campaign. And although now, as we've built the brand, we're able to actually look at areas like soft power, and we actually are able to fund and finance soft power activities which take us into beyond year-on-year ROI, we've had to generate and earn the ability to continue this campaign on an annual basis. It's based on customer insight. That's a really important point of it. Those, what we call pillars, those very early days, we looked actually at what perceptions around the world of the UK were and where, in a sense, we were weak and where we wanted to shift them. On the basis that if we could shift those perceptions around innovation and creativity, technology and entrepreneurial with strong evidence-based stories, we would actually encourage more people to come here and invest in the UK. On the tourism package, Britain, very, very well known for its heritage and culture, but frankly, people didn't know we had a countryside. And therefore, to actually try and introduce two strengths and a perceptual weakness in order to drive our rural economy was a real target. And finally, our fantastic education. And that, of course, is a very, very strong offer to the world. It's interesting, behind all this sophistication, of course, we are dealing with changing people's stereotypes. And I love that image of the castle. Heritage is great. When we actually showed that in Brazil, people said to us, well, you're lying. And that's very difficult to take from a place like Number 10 or wherever you like. I was thinking, that's a bit troublesome. What's the problem? The castle's clearly over 1,000 years old and so on. And they said, it's the blue sky. You've obviously retouched it. There is no blue sky in Britain. And, and fine, cool. I mean, to be honest, if somebody said to me, what more do you know about Brazil than the favelas, the Sporting, the Rio, etc., that I'm not sure I could answer. So at one primal level, we're dealing with some pretty primary stereotypes in a very, very confused and cluttered communications environment, which we've got to really get through. On the other level, of course, we're not just putting this stuff out to the world in such an ineffective way as big posters and all the rest of it. We used to do that to land the brand. It's far more sophisticated and targeted now, and it really is based on evidence and metrics as we go through. It is now a global campaign, and those big dots, in a sense, there are two components to this campaign. One is actually where we place our funding, where we allocate budgets in order to try and drive those return on investments. And then there is actually marshalling the entire British government machine overseas to actually work with us on this campaign. And that's 144 countries it's now active in. And they're able to download assets, download databases. They're required to use the brand. In addition, actually, of course, we have this challenge fund. We introduced a challenge fund where actually we allocate our main budgets to priority markets, but we keep quite a lot by to actually invite posts to come in and bid for money for very strong ideas. And these little orange dots, and there are many more of them, have proved to be incredibly successful. Incredibly. Funny enough, in terms of return on investment, it's actually much higher than some of the broad-based allocations. But it is actually a truly global campaign. And from the beginning, I think that what was different about it was, first of all, we used the Union Jack. Let's make no mistake about this. It's an incredibly strong icon. Secondly, it never felt or looked like a government campaign. It felt like, and it was, of course, it was politically neutral and cross-party. And we were able very early on to encourage business to join. The first businesses that came in were those who could trade off a country of origin effect. The British Airways, the Virgins, and so on. But actually, more and more companies have become involved. I think about over 140 companies, or maybe even more, have now become involved, either giving cash or in-kind activity to support and spread and deliver greater reach and credibility for the campaign. And I just want to point you to that one on the bottom left, Aston Martin, because it's a lovely story of win, 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 getting it right for business. Aston Martin came to us, a wonderful British product, British-made product, and said to us, we're really excited by this campaign. We will build you a unique Aston Martin from the ground up, your own Aston Martin, for you to be able to take around the world in order to promote British luxury, craftsmanship, design, and many other assets. And we said, brilliant, thank you very much, lovely, we'll work with that. And on the way, we would take it out to Shanghai, and on the way, we dropped it off in Tokyo, where the Duke of Cambridge stepped out of his plane, stepped into that Aston Martin in front of the Japanese press, and Aston Martin's sales in Japan doubled for the next 3 months. So from a spirit of generosity, of joining a campaign, to actually benefiting commercially from it. Our story is about Great Britain. We need content. We need fantastic content. They got it. They helped. They benefited from that. And that's, we're doing more and more of that, of those wonderful win-win-win situations. We have yachts going around, the Great Clipper yacht, again, generously donated by the founder of the race, who also gains huge credibility from it, but actually it's our trade and investment platform when it goes around the world. Even British Airways, well, not especially British Airways, happy to actually brand one of their jets, I have to say at no charge, which was really very generous of them. So there is this kind of understanding that if we know what we're about, we value what we're about, we understand what we're about, we can actually have mature conversations with companies who want to get involved. And that's why we do things like actually measure the brand, measure the value of the brand. And I can say now it's about 217 million, the actual brand Great, not brand Great Britain, that's huge, but, and it's got a rise in value, an expected rise in value if we keep on investing it, to about 2 billion in 3 or 4 years, which would make it one of the UK's top 50 brands. And the reason we valued it, it's not because we want to sell it, but actually we want to have those conversations with major corporates who do understand the value of their brands. And that's, again, the elements we're trying to take into this. And again, it's absolutely impossible to go over to David Beckham and say, Mr. Beckham, would you kind of just give us your images and would you work for us for nothing if you're a commercial company? You can't do that. I mean, if we ask David Beckham through the front door actually to work with us, it'll probably be our entire budget. But if you actually make a call to him, helpfully from number 10 Downing Street, and say, this is our campaign, it's about jobs and growth for Britain, it's about giving opportunities, would you therefore actually help us and assist us? He was very, very happy to do so. And many, many people have actually helped that, from the royal family to designers, stars, and so on. Those credible voices we all crave, who actually give greater reach, those famous Britons who give greater reach to any campaign and add actually a sense, help us cut through. So around film, we do a lot of work in film because film tourism is incredibly strong. That's why we work with Skyfall and Paddington. British film industry is booming because of tax credits and so on. It employs people. It's very good for inward investment, students, etc. It's a really good story, but to really make film really happen, you need to be at the Oscars, you need to be with Oscar-winning British film producers and actors and so on. You need to play that game in order to combine everything together to get that real impact beyond just conventional advertising, of which we do very little now. And the run rate really is round about, actually last month it was 120. We're doing about 80 to 100 activations a month around the world. And that is everything from infrastructure, smart cities, healthcare, digital, ICT, film, fashion, tourism, education, the whole spectrum. And of course, that is not like a corporate brand or whatever where you can focus and so on. We have to cover the whole spectrum. And that is, in addition, areas, for instance, promoting the Devolves, Scotland, the Northern Powerhouse, London, who are great partners of ours. So it's keeping that whole thing going. We do have a kind of essence. We want to be positioned and promoted as the most creative and innovative island on this world because we actually think that is a really strong competitive positioning that we can back up and offer. But we don't necessarily declare it because it's such a wide-reaching campaign. I'm just going to flick through 6 weeks. I just want to take you through 6 weeks in the life of Great, because one of the things that we do is we're constantly updating and informing and campaigning the campaign within governments and across the world. So here's just to give you a spread of it, the last 6 weeks of activity by highlights. Of course, we're at Rugby World Cup, a fantastic occasion. Many congratulations. I think we were more successful off the pitch than we were on the pitch. But the Rugby World Cup was a chance for us to both celebrate the UK as a home of rugby and also actually do conferences and businesses conferences around it. When any minister, including the PM, goes overseas to talk about investment on major visits and so on, this brand has appeared and is used mandatorily. The control is very important there. A great way to pull together competitors. Those car brands up there are competitors, but they have one thing in common. They're all built in Britain, to giving them a great send-off to go off to the Frankfurt Motor Fair. So this is, again, where a brand can sit above it and bring competitors and actually collaborate together, adding content and actually strengthening their offers. Great stuff in Brazil, always reminding, taking those central pillars of creativity. Lewis Hamilton dropped in for us in Milan while he was there to actually support our Milan Expo. And of course the Teletubbies, bless them, they're back. They turned up as well. Teletubbies, Doctor Who, they're all at it. They're all doing very, very well, and they all join in the campaign. Fantastic example of innovation, our Bloodhound sports car, which is hoping to break the land speed record of 1,000 miles an hour. 159 British companies actually behind that. So really, really strong engineering and innovation story, as well as a story of actually encouraging, it goes around the world, very successfully getting engineering students to come to the UK and study here. Downton Abbey, huge asset, soft power asset. Conversations with Hugh Bonneville about Downton, the future, and also, of course, why Britain is such a great place to have such a series there. Put out in digital media, chopped and changed, and actually promoted around the world. Far as Mongolia, we love that. Mongolia is part of the Great British campaign, the fair there, and so you can see the spread of it. From upper end design in Southampton Boat Show to a new tourism campaign. Probably shouldn't show you this, but I'm very proud to #OMGB, positioning Great Britain as a place for amazing moments. We're not going to compete on beaches, but we actually want to compete on that one fundamental thing. If you come to this country, you will find amazing moments, and that's a kick-off there. A real effort, something if anybody is around this weekend, you'll see actually a real effort, domestic effort, to encourage the UK's small and medium-sized companies to export. Not by telling them how good exporting is, but bringing them live opportunities around the world, which they can actually, genuine contracts. And there'll be a major promotional push at the weekend. The China State visit, this is a return match in a way from the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, who supported us in Shanghai when the Premier came round. They hosted a creative event in Lancaster House. A soft power play. Shakespeare is going to be his 400th anniversary next year. He's huge. He belongs to the world. Perhaps he belongs to Britain because he was born here, but he really is a truly global icon. And we very much want to celebrate the 400th anniversary of his death, and actually to explain to the world and share with the world how relevant we think he is today. That's not about commercial ROI. That is actually in the sense of soft power spreading out, perhaps connecting with the millennials of the future, who may well actually become friends of Britain and therefore have commercial links in the future. But to miss an opportunity like Shakespeare, I think, would be negligent. So therefore, a big investment in Shakespeare Lives. Bond, of course, that's running in 63 countries around the world. We had great success with Skyfall, working with Eon, Barbara Broccoli, and we're working together on the latest Sceptre film. Bond is great. Every embassy will actually, 63 of them around the world will be carrying Bond is great activations, where again, like the Aston Martin, they can talk wider than Bond. They can talk about British fashion, luxury, filmmaking, and many other things beside. Somewhere, interestingly, in Pakistan, celebrating a festival of creativity and fashion using the brand. Music is great. I think there's a great fan of the campaign who kicked off the whole Music is Great pillar, but actually at Sykes, at a new British for newcomers coming into the music business, breakthrough brands. There's a kind of activation in New York. Bollywood, in advance of Modi's visit, we're also, of course, very aware that one of the great Bollywood films has been launched in the UK, and therefore the opportunity to promote the UK as a destination there. And again, looking at that actually in advance of Modi's visit, a new kind of brand area where actually we're talking about collaboration, working together, and how these companies could only have been successful by actually joint activity there. I always put that in because sometimes it is down to trade fairs, isn't it? And I just put that down there to remind ourselves that actually a concerted effort in that business, in that area, to show one brand in a very, very cluttered environment can really work. My goodness, the Coldstream Guards seem to travel everywhere. That last scene in South Korea, hope they're coming home safely. More innovation in France. Food, very important. Again, what I'd call one of our golden products, where we need to really sell more food, but actually encourage more people to understand that British food is of incredibly high quality, with stars and celebrities in Indonesia, and taking our Magna Carta around the world, especially to China and the Far East. And finally, despite the poor branding, Mick Jagger at long last got him in Cuba next to a great promotion. We are very, very lucky, of course, how many amazing people we have. That just gives you a kind of 6-week picture of what we're doing. The point I think about this is, while that's very exciting and strong and on brand and consistent, what are the underlying metrics? Well, those are the audited metrics, 1.4 billion so far, externally audited, validated, taken to the Treasury, signed off. Another 1.4 billion under validation at the moment, with further money in the pipeline, running at about 20 to 25 to 1 ROI. And that excludes all the activity that goes on that we don't fund. We just follow the money. If we counted everything, we would be double counting. We just simply follow the investment in it. So there is, I don't want to reduce it down to the numbers and the ROI. There's a whole much more about this. But this central tenet about jobs and growth for Britain, an economic campaign, we translate it back in very, very strict terms. Active in 14 countries. You're talking about actually complexity and so on. 17 government departments working together is pretty complex, I have to say, which is perhaps why we sit in number 10, Downing Street, to be able to actually control the campaign. 400 companies, individuals, 75 cultural institutions, and they contribute a whole lot more than the figure there. But again, we always sorry, I'm going to get this wrong, aren't I? Under-promise and over-deliver, he said, his fatal last words, because we are so cautious about this. So I could probably put a naught on that and make an argument for it, but actually we just want to keep it really, really kind of low-key in that area. The brand, as I say, is valued. Digital, okay-ish. Would love to put a naught on that. And what's interesting, if one stands back from the hard measures, is what I call the great uplift. If we go around the world and we actually focus group and test with audiences across all our across all our areas of inward investment, exporting, tourism and education. And we ask them, have you seen or have you not seen the great brand, and therefore what is your increasing consideration to either come, visit, study here in the UK? It's about between 10 and 16% uplift. And that, I think, is a very, very powerful argument that we use. It's a perceptual argument that we use both to actually encourage more companies to come to us, both to actually talk to our colleagues in government and say, do you realise this is a very powerful platform which we want to create, and we want to continue creating it. This is a 3.5 to 4-year-old brand. It's a child. It needs a much long way to go. And therefore, we're very, very intent on continuing it in a consistent but creative manner and making these arguments and tracking them through. I've probably overrun, so I'm going to stop at that point, but just hopefully that gave you an introduction into the Great Britain campaign. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think your presentation was great. And your brand is great. Actually, Great Britain brand scores very high in the Digital Country Index, the Boom Consulting just released index, always in the top 10 worldwide in all dimensions. Maybe countries have a lot to learn, especially on the management side. You said it several times, and I think it's one of the key drivers. You'll probably tell if it is the key drivers or not. Being in the CEO of the brand, being close to the CEO, being close to the Prime Minister, and making and raising the importance of this. And that is not a vanity contest, but it's a national asset to be treated. So thank you. The next presentation is about a great brand as well. It's about Africa. Africa as a brand, Africa as a whole. We say that Africa is going to be the new China in 20 years. We can talk about that later. That's not my conversation now. And we bring in here the founder and the chairman, Thebe Ikalafeng, if I spell it correctly, that is going to talk about how to build and how to engage not just the stakeholders in the country, but all the countries in the continent. So without further ado, Tebe, welcome. One more applause.
My colleague from South Africa who's sitting next to me says to me, why should Africa be the next China? Why can't Africa be Africa? We agree with her. We agree with her. I've retitled the speech a little bit. I was speaking yesterday in Senegal on a lot of things, and I thought, let me tighten up this. Let me bring the good news to England, seeing that the weather is so bad today. It's not as bad as it can get, but let me bring the good news to England. Our continent is an amazing continent. I think you've read everything about it that is wrong. That was written by not Africans. In 1984, from 1992 to 2000, when economists beautifully summed it up, the hopeless continent. So imagine all the Africans who wanted to hide. When we saw that, we said, we need to hide because we're a terrible continent. And when they come to the continent, the first thing they say, where are the animals? Because we need to see the animals. We read about them. They said, such a sad continent. They are sick, there's famine. They're like, that's where the savages come from. Idi Amin, we remember him well. And that one who doesn't want to go away because the queen has not paid him back is dead. That continent is so corrupt, they say. Got a bunch of monkeys in there, don't they? They're all over the place. If you're going to create brands, you must put a monkey on it, because then the brands will sell well. Do you know, whatever happens in Zimbabwe, the rest of the continent is just like that. They're all the same. So us, as Africans, we've learned a few things. As Chinua Achebe said, the great Nigerian author, if you don't like someone's story, write your own. So here we are, writing the story. But I thought, take a moment and just... Now that you know how great everybody else is, everybody still wants to come to Africa, even if they get lost along the way. The beauty is our continent is rising. It's an amazing continent, and economists corrected themselves, as did Time magazine, as does everybody else. That's why we're all here. That's why everybody wants to eat from Africa, because there is no better place to eat from. 385 billion, the trade between China and Africa. That's a lot of moolah. If you look at 1990 alone, it was $1 billion. That's how much China had in Africa. Today, 385, the trade in between. I love what Jay Naidoo said. He's the chairman of GAIN, and he said this at the Brand Africa Forum I ran a few years ago. He said, China has an agenda for Africa, India's got an agenda for Africa, the US got an agenda for Africa, Europe has got an agenda for Africa. We are naive to think that the people who come here to Africa wants to help us. They are here to run their own agenda. The thing is, we need to know what is our agenda. Everybody should have their own agenda. And we need to reverse the whole thinking. We need to stop begging, blaming, and borrowing, because all the years of trillions of dollars over the last 50 years have done nothing but turn people into corrupt leaders and make the countries even poorer and more indebted to the rest of the world. Begging has done nothing for Africans. You must believe what Coca-Cola says. There are 1 billion reasons to love our continent, because our continent has got an agenda. And that agenda is an agenda to be peaceful, to be prosperous, and to be united. So I love what the previous president of South Africa said, Thabo Mbeki. He said this in 1998 at the United Nations University. He said, out of this new Africa must come new products of human economic activity, significant contributions to the world of knowledge, the arts, science, technology, new images of an Africa that is peaceful and prosperous. That is our agenda. We are very peaceful. So despite what you read everywhere else, that one country here, there has got war, if there's a little bit of war happening between Ireland and somebody, nobody says Europe is under fire. But in Africa, if something is happening in CAR, they're like, those Africans cannot stop fighting. But they forget that since in 2000, there were 16 raging wars in Africa. Today, there's only one or two couple of skirmishes in the continent. We are a very prosperous bunch, and we are urbanizing. We've had the fastest urbanization between 2000 and 2006, and by 2050, we would have reached 62% urbanization. We are moving out of what everybody else's idea is of Africa. We are creating babies. You know, I was watching how Nestle and everybody's excited that the Chinese have got one more baby so they can sell a lot of milk. Isn't it amazing? That's a headline. It's like, oof, we can make money. Well, we already at 8, 5, 7, 10 kids. We are far outpacing the Chinese. I think Nestle needs to come look down to Africa, because not only that, we are growing, our economies are growing. Yes, this year is going to slow down to about 4% or so, but we are growing nonetheless, and we are spending $1 trillion in consumer spending. And our folks are rich. And did you notice there's no precedent on that list of rich people? Because, you know, when people talk about Africa, they're thinking of the rich presidents. If you look at the top 3, 4 guys, Aliko Dangote, Harry Oppenheimer, De Beers. I think the Queen still owes us 1 diamond. The Cullinan, it's still there somewhere. We need to come back. But I think she's cut it up between all the kids who've been divorcing, gives them 1 each. 1 little bit of diamond. But nonetheless, Harry Oppenheimer, South Africa, Aliko Dangote, Nigeria. The Egyptian billionaire, Nassef Sawiris, the richest man in Egypt, is now the biggest investor at Adidas. We are flexing our economic muscle. We have learned a few things about how to move up the economic value. We know that we have to stop being the producers of raw materials. We need to start, or rather to be the source of raw materials. We need to produce them. We need to add some value. We need to brand, and we need to create great brands. We know something about brands, or at least how to mess up the brands you created. We're very creative. I mean, why waste a good telephone book? At the end of the year, people talk about recycling, repurposing. We've been doing it all our lives. So the last 5 years, I've been running. 5 years ago, I launched Africa's Best Brands, which is really looking at what are the best brands in Africa. So you can get it on brandafrica.org. And I work actually with a company in London. We'll talk about it in a minute. And what we try to do, we try to establish where do Africans put their money. And we start with the admiration, and then we go to what's the value of those brands. And this year we work with Geopol, I'm sure you all know very well, who've got the biggest footprint of mobile across the continent, across the world, 200 million in Africa, TNS, which is the biggest research firm, and Brand Finance, which based here in London, and South Africa, look after the South African part of it, the African part of it. We did a survey across 22 countries. Those 22 countries represent 77% of the GDP of the continent and 77% of the population. So I guess we can conclude that it is a Pan-African study. Because if you look at the countries, we represent every single geographic political region, zone, and every political region and every single economic zone in Africa we covered. And the brands which came out of that survey, out of the list, you can see where they all are. South Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, Botswana here. So the brands are from all over. Now here's the amazing thing. 21% of the brands that Africans admire come from the US. The US have always been the biggest colonizers, haven't they? They're just acting a bit differently. They've always taken over the world. They've taken over Africa, with 21% of the brands that we admire. If you look at all the brands in Africa, only 1% of the value, 23% of the brands out of the top 100 are African. So 77% of the brands that Africans admire are non-African. I don't see it as a problem. I see it as an opportunity. It's an opportunity for Africans to create, to play in this space. And 1% of the value of the top 100 is African. I see there's 99% opportunity for us to get rich. And you can imagine where the brands are, aren't they? The brands that Africans admire, they will start with electronics. We like to talk, we like to look good, we like to drink, we like to, that's us, we like to eat. So the key brands are, this list I can imagine will be pretty much similar to the rest of the list in the world, because we are just as everybody else. Human beings just happen to be from another continent. And our interests are the same, and our passions are the same. But African multinationals are also beginning to muscle their way in internationally. Brands like MTN, brands like Kenya Airways, Standard Bank, EcoBank has got the biggest distribution, I think, across Africa. I think over 33 countries in Africa. Standard Bank's quick behind them. Kenya Airways flies to, I guess, second to Ethiopian Airways in the continent. MTN, the biggest African brand, 17 countries in Africa, serving almost 200 million consumers. ShopRite, almost in every other African country. Sasol, probably one of the best-known global African brands out of South Africa. What we also know is that African brands can compete. And if you look at the Global Finance 500 by Brand Finance, you will notice MTN at number 302. And it only operates in Africa and the Middle East. That's it. But it already features among the top 500 most valuable brands in the world. And many of them we know we can't do anything without them. Now, where are we putting what type of brands are we creating? If you look at M-Pesa out of Kenya, Safaricom, that brand took financial access in Kenya from 5% in 2006 to 70% in 2010. The brands that do well in Africa are the brands which transform people's lives. That's what brands should do anyway. You look at the Nigerians, they're like, we understand Hollywood, we understand Bollywood, but we understand Nigeria even better. So if we are going to tell stories on our televisions, on our screens, wouldn't they even be better if they were Nigerian stories? So we are taking control of our own stories, and we are enjoying ourselves. Because the one thing that we do well now, we put Africa in everything that we do. And part of how Africa is going to rebrand itself is when Africa admires, loves, and promotes Africa, and deposits Africa. I was speaking to my friends now at Brand Finance earlier, that, if you look at Britain, Britain loves Britain. That's why when you see Great Britain, you say you go to China, the Chinese says, do you want to come do business here, Mr. Facebook? As long as your name is Alibaba, we'll allow you. Otherwise, the borders are closed. You have to love your culture. You have to love your country. You have to love your people, because nobody knows them better than you are. We are a united bunch. You look at what's uniting us. Telecommunications is uniting us. Mobile is uniting us because it has broken down the barriers. We are learning one or two things about how to do this thing well. If you look at intra-Africa, intra-Europe trade, it's about, 60% Western Europe. It's about 60%. You look at America, it's about, North America, it's about 40%. Africa, we're only at about 12%. For the continent to move forward as part of the rebranding of the continent, we need to do business with Africa. We need to encourage Africans to buy Africa. That's why the tripartite free trade agreement, which was signed a couple of months ago in July or so, opening up the borders to 21 African countries, is opening up a market of $1.2 trillion for Africans and everybody else who knows how to do Africa. That's the one area where we are going to do that, is when we begin to own our ideas. See, the challenge with Africans is we don't own our ideas. And you look at Africa Regional Intellectual Property Organization. They try to say, you know what? As Africans, let's work together. Let's unite, and try and protect our intellectual property everywhere we go. Because if you are thinking about going global as an African, or you are thinking about staying in Africa, this is where we need to be focusing our energies on. We need to industrialize. Because the challenge with Africa is we can see how China has moved up the rankings. It is by no pure coincidence that China is where they are, because they saw the opportunity and said, we need to industrialize. That's why you have to appreciate somebody like Aliko Dangote, who puts in $500 million of his money in Ethiopia and everywhere else in Africa. And he says, we are going to challenge Lafarge here in Africa. If you look at the issue about what we need to do, part of our rebranding is we need to protect our ideas. It is unconscionable that 1% of the total share of patent filings is African. And you can see where the Chinese are. The Chinese are completely embracing the idea of owning the ideas, creating and owning the ideas. And when I talk about owning the ideas, I don't know, so many of you know this picture very well. If you come to Africa, you come to emerging markets, you'll see these pictures of people carrying these bags. These are the most amazing bags. They are durable, they are all those, but I know probably 3/4 of you says, but they are so primitive. It's just plastic. Who wants to be seen with such horror? Until Louis Vuitton put them on the ramp. When they put them on the ramp, everybody says, I need to carry myself one of those bags from Africa, validated by Vuitton. Do you know, amazing thing on our Brand Africa 100 list, when we look at the top three, when you look at the top three textile brands or fashion brands, that GTP, Wooden, and Vlisco, made in the Netherlands. That's cultural appropriation, isn't it? Because the concept, the idea, the inspiration is African. Africans should have been leading this. Not the Dutch. It's enough that they came to Africa 400 years ago and they left us in a mess. Yesterday I was in Senegal. They said to me, Tebe, you're not going to be invited back to Senegal. But I'm sure I'll be invited back to Senegal, as I will be in the Netherlands, because I'm using an African passport. Do you know, the Basutus are very regal people, very proud people. Somebody used to work some guy used to be in Lesotho. And when he left Lesotho, he joined Louis Vuitton and took the idea to them. And he says it quite openly. He says, I was inspired by the Basotho blankets. If Africans could recognize that, that's part of what we need to do. You look at Starbucks and Nespresso fighting over African beans. You know Africa is within the coffee belt. Ethiopia is one of the biggest producers of coffee. Matter of fact, Ethiopia is the home of coffee in Kaffa. So you can imagine the fight that Starbucks had with Ethiopia. When Starbucks opposed the Ethiopians wanting to register the Starbucks brand in America, it was a massive fight. Starbucks was very happy to pay the Ethiopians 1.25 pounds and make 20 pounds out of it. And the Ethiopian says, but our farmers are making only 50 pence. And your billings, your total revenues are over 7 billion at that time, 2006, I think. So obviously this battle was settled somewhere. They all met each other halfway. I can imagine how the conversation went with Mr. Schultz. The Ethiopians came with the bags, which were now branded, and they came to sell the coffee to Mr. Schultz. And they said, Mr. Schultz, the coffee is now 20 pounds. And Mr. Schultz must have said to them, are you out of your mind? I used to pay you $1, £1.25 for that bag. They said, oh, Mr. Schultz, it's not the same bag. This one here is branded. They all met each other somewhere. We need to spend money on R&D because we're not spending enough. We need to leverage our mobile penetration and use that as a platform. We need to create clear value propositions for our countries, our continent altogether. We need to have a strategic approach to how we move, how we brand the nation. You know, the difference between Great Britain and America and China and Africa is that they are one block. We are 54 different countries. So we have to go one country at a time, one city at a time. We need to value how the impact of all this is going. So you see what we do at Brand Finance, putting a valuation on these city brands. 4 out of 5 of the top 5 fastest growing nations are African in the list which has just come out from Brand Finance. So 4 out of 5 of the fastest growing nations. If you look at the list, South Africa is still obviously the dominant nation brand in Africa. I did this, I must do an updated one, but I just tried to see what is the correlation between nation brand and nation and the GDP. And there's a pretty clear correlation. The wealthier you are, the higher your brand. In closing, there's 5 things we need to do as a continent. Clear value propositions by country and collectively. Innovation or creativity, we need to own our ideas. We need to work together. We need to be proud of where we come from. We need to own our culture because Europe may have a past, America may have a past, Africa has a future.
So we are running a little bit short of time, but I have one question for both of you, which it very much touches the aspect of the country of origin and also touching the aspect of valuation and return on investment. I think it's most of the times people do not talk about the brand and the financial value and economic value, and both presentations really touch that point, and I think that is something that is really interesting because it's not very common. Could you elaborate, for instance, let's start with you, Tebe. I mean, this valuation, what is the process? How do you reach that value? And what are the advantages of reaching to that number, for instance?
Well, first I must say that what gets measured gets done. Okay. So as the saying goes, so if we're not able to put a metric on the table, we're not able to measure the progress that we're making. So the input obviously into measuring a country brand, as he'll add, has to do with the incomes into the country, the GDPs, the investments into the country, also the opinions of the citizens and opinions of the investors and the opinions of the world. So we look at all those aspects when we're looking at how we measure what a country, I keep saying country, continent, because in Africa, we've got 54 countries, and we cannot collectively measure the African brand yet, but I'm sure we're going to look at it soon. Yes. But we are going to do it one country at a time. And you look at, we're already doing it in several countries, from Morocco to South Africa to Nigeria to Kenya, Botswana. So we're doing it in desperate countries already.
And you feel it has a practical use? I mean, the stakeholders understand better what place branding, country branding is about when you show a number like that, when you show the valuation?
You know, the bit about doing the valuation is it's not just the final metric that comes to the end, but it's also the gaps in between. Okay. So we're looking at in terms of what you need to do for citizenship, what do you need to do for governance, what do you need to do for culture, what do you need to do for a range of the other metrics which inform the valuation. But I think for citizens as well, it's also a matter of competitiveness. How we're doing relative to the
an analysis between the others. Okay, yes, to put.
Yes.
Okay. Very good. Thank you, Conrad. I'm very curious about the numbers that you showed. Can you talk a little? Can you walk us through a little bit?
I mean, first of all, congratulations. I mean, I just, you've got a great task ahead of you, and I think you've got a fantastic brand and so on. I mean, in a sense, we're in a slightly different situation because what we're trying to do is measure the effect of this campaign in order to get more investment in it. Yeah. So, in a sense, we've got values of what Great Britain is, the royal family. If we did nothing, those would go up. But actually trying to make the economic argument for maintaining this campaign, which everybody thinks is a generally good idea, but actually then being able to go to the Treasury and say, we would like X million next year, next year, next year in order to invest in this. That's really what we're looking at. And so what we're looking at here is additionality, not business as usual, not what the government does, but what absolute effect and impact this particular activity has on everything else. That's difficult to disaggregate, which is why we're so very, very cautious about it. But we have 4 measures. We track all our tourist numbers, which are probably the easiest measure because they're so well worn. You can exactly see what the great effect is and therefore count people in, model it, and say that's given that value over time. Students, again, relatively easy, except it's a 2-year cycle. When you come to inward investment deals, it's a 1 to 5 year cycle for an inward investment deal. So if actually some of our activity, big events, yields leads, we will then follow those leads over a 5-year cycle, which is why it takes so long. And then at the end of it, if it's successful, we will attribute a tiny percentage of that to this activity, a tiny percentage. And the same with export wins. If we're winning, helping companies win very, very big slabs of business, we will interview them and probably say a 1% or a 2% attribution. So we're extremely cautious, and that's how we build up our numbers. And again, what doesn't get measured gets done. What gets measured gets done. We try and measure everything, but absolutely not kill creativity. So we have a sort of idea what we call freedom within frontiers. The frontiers are quite tight, but we really want people to innovate. And what we do in terms of the management is really look after 6 things from number 10. Getting the money, pulling the money in, holding the money and reallocating it according to strategic objectives. All the governance that you would do normally under a big program like this and the reporting up to the Prime Minister. The strategy, the brand. The brand is absolutely maintained by us in the centre. The evaluation is rigorously maintained by us in the centre. And we also keep some of those absolutely key partnerships, relationships, for instance, with the palace or the major corporates or stuff like that. Beyond that, that's the frontiers. Then we try and encourage freedom as we go. And there's a lot of training and investment around it. So that's the management system around it, and that's the metric system.
I think the beauty about Britain is, like you say, it's controllable. Whereas looking at an African thing is like herding cats.
I would like to say, we all have our control problems. So I've got 17 government departments, devolved administration, Scotland, London, bless you, all that. Even in our tiny little world, we have that. But you have it on a much bigger scale. Exactly. But yes, keeping it together is the real task. Yeah.
You say that, just to wrap up the last question, if it's okay, would you consider that's the biggest challenge, or would you say another challenge, your biggest challenge whenever you do your day-to-day job?
For me, that's a lot of percentage of my time is holding it together. Actually educating people to say that we're in this for the long term. Don't change it, don't chuck it up, don't flip, keep it exciting. Stopping the rogue actors going out there. Yeah, I mean, as I say, I was 24 when I went into Number 10 to run this campaign, and look at me now, 3.5 years. And most of my white hair, to be honest, I can point to other government departments, bless them. Business loves it. Business is great to work with and so on. Sometimes it's your own institutions who can be the tough people to persuade.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think in the African context is, remember, you first have to deal with the concept of branding as it is. Our branding is old as everybody else, but just the whole idea of branding as a concept that can be applied to places, forget even places, can be applied to products. I mean, if you see 23%, like I said, of the brands that Africans admire are not, Africans admire Africans. So it means there's that big challenge that has to be overcome first. Because as soon as you know what brands do well for us, for everybody, is that they're going to help us with 3 things. One, they're going to help to create successful companies, and those companies are going to be able to create jobs. And if you look at Africa, where 70% is under the age of 30 and over 50% of them are unemployed, those jobs are badly needed. And when you have those jobs, when you have those companies successful, you're going to be able to create tax revenues. And the tax revenue will help to pay for public goods. So we don't have to go to China, to England, to everywhere else to borrow money. We can create their own money here at home. And third and most important is we know what great brands do. I'm sure there was someone here, someone would have told you that brands of a nation more often than not become a vector of their image. So when people when people think of America, we think of Facebook or Twitter and all those, because those brands help to have a halo. When you think about England, we think about the Queen as one brand. We think about the Earl Greys and all the other great brands. Sorry about Rover, it's gone somewhere else, hasn't it? But you know, we think about...
Still employing, still built by Brits.
But I mean, those are great brands which help to shape the image of the country, because politicians on their own, left to their own devices, will just be their politicians. The jobs, brands do a lot more than politicians.
Very good. Thank you very much. Great presentation. Thank you.